Alright, so despite all the bugs happening in the game right now, I think we can still make a guide for this boss in particular. I'll make a note about big pointers about this boss so you can go ahead and do your hits properly. In terms of setting up teams, the checklist for the team building is rather simple. First is bringing in an elemental advantage electric unit for each of the teams you're building. There's an elemental shield QTE that requires an element advantage electric for it and pretty much fails the raid if you cannot do it. Second is some form of defensive sustain. Most default meta units have a healer or shield, but there is also the option for cover recovery with litter. The boss has a lightning AoE damage over time phase at the later portion of the fight, and some players may feel the pressure of needing a healer around that time if they haven't dealt with the phases before and come into phase 3 with low health. There are some ways where some teams can survive with no healer, but this is mostly some higher invested teams or specific comps. The most important takeaway here also for surviving is having your highest attack DPS survive the barrage coming from the machine gun attacks that's happening throughout the fight. There's a few ways to work around this. One, if you're strong enough, you can destroy the machine guns before they attack you. That's the simplest form of getting rid of the problem. 2. If that's not the case, the alternative is to have your highest attack have some form of sustain or lifesteal. Typically, this would be units like Alice, Asuka, or even Red Hood or 2B. 3. Adjusting to your burst order or timing so that you can force who's the highest attack at the time of the machine gun shooting. This can allow you to juggle the highest attack to alleviate the cover or HP pressure on a single unit. Units that have bonus attack when they're bursting are useful here, like Scarlet Black Shadow, Alice, Red Hood, and Ludmilla are some example units that buff their own attack when they burst, and thus you can manipulate the enemy AI into targeting them. 4. You can make sure to take advantage of taking cover as well. In team with litter, you can take advantage of not having a healer because of litter's cover recovery. Moving on to the boss fight is rather straightforward in terms of what you have to do as a player. Right off the bat on phase 1, what I just talked about immediately happens. The first mechanic the boss does is machine gun, which targets the highest attack, and we can deal with this accordingly. If you are strong enough, you can pretty much skip the machine gun mechanic and not have your DPS suffer. Alternatively, you can choose to control who will receive that damage by bursting accordingly with whoever has the highest attack. This can help you figure out who to cover as well to keep your units alive. In this team I'm running, I have litter which has cover recovery, so I can have my cover shield tank the damage instead to keep my HP high. This comes up important later on, especially on this team where I'm not running a healer, to save as much of my HP as much as possible. After the machine gun attack are missiles, and this is pretty much straightforward and just shoot them to avoid taking damage. Now moving on to phase 2, the boss has a very predictable pattern here, and the important part is understanding the window of opportunities for you to have your burst timings. The boss does have a following pattern of spawning the machine guns, throwing rock twice in a row, then doing a machine gun which targets the highest attack, and then missile, and then throwing the rocks again, and then doing a shield QTE where you need your electric unit to deal with that, and then the machine gun again shooting for the highest attack unit. The boss does this full rotation twice for phase 2, and now depending on your team, you may approach this phase 2 differently. If your team doesn't have good sustain or your DPS cannot survive, then it's your best interest to kill the machine guns as soon as possible. For example, my unit took 1 mil damage when there were 2 machine guns, but it only took 500k damage when there was only 1. Ideally, your goal is to destroy these as soon as possible if your main DPS cannot properly tank the fight. Highly invested, extremely strong, no healer teams can properly survive this phase and not take any damage at all as long as they can kill it in time or perhaps take cover in time to guard themselves from damage. You can target the machine gun if you aim slightly lower. The horns are blocking the way to hitting the machine gun at times, so be wary of that. If you're using a Pierce or AoE rocket launcher, then this issue may not be as big of a deal. Speaking of Pierce, you can also take advantage of Pierce in this situation to deal extra damage. If your team can afford to take a slower time on killing the parts, such as if you have good sustain, then this is something worth considering to deal bonus damage. Machine guns aside from phase 2, you have to pay attention to the windows when the boss throws rocks at you. Some players could deal with the rocks without bursting, but for many people, they might need assistance of full burst to deal with the rocks getting thrown at us. You may have to speed up or delay your burst timing, or maybe even delay the electric shield QTE to match the boss pattern so that you're bursting in time. After the boss does the phase 2 pattern twice, it will go into transition around halfway through the fight. It will do a parting missile and jump back and then ram towards the team. This charge can be covered as needed, but the most important thing here is that you have to have a way to deal with the upcoming phase transition QTE. For most teams, the easiest method to deal with this is to have your full burst ready. So you may also have to make sure you're setting up your burst rotation and energy gain properly. As a reminder, using the traditional sniper rifle or rocket launcher can also help a lot with the energy gains. If your team somehow has a rocket launcher such as Tia for example, they can also deal easily with the QTE by aiming in the middle and letting the rocket launcher's AoE clear the whole surrounding. The middle QTE requires slightly more hits compared to a round, but it's a way for a rocket launcher to have an easier time with their splash damage. Finally, after this phase transition is phase 3. This is a pretty straightforward phase as basically there is just a QTE happening, and I think a lot of people are pretty much confused at what to do in this phase. To simplify it, this phase has AoE lightning damage over time, and this damage goes past through your cover. If you don't do the QTE, the lightning damage ticks lasts longer. Contrary to some belief that the boss ram damage becomes higher if you don't do the QTE, it's actually the same damage regardless whether you do the QTE or not. But in this example test I had, there were 12 ticks of lightning when I didn't do the QTE, and there were only 6 ticks of lightning when I did the QTE. To simplify this, if your team has sustain and can keep yourself alive, you can ignore the QTE. But if you cannot, then do the QTE. After the boss rams at us, it does the QTE phase out again, and you need to properly deal with the QTE again where being in burst is recommended. After that, that's pretty much it, and it will just repeat phase 3. And that's it. That's the boss fight. Moving on to teams, I'll talk about some of the teams you can use to work with. As usual, this is just what's now, and you'll find some updates on the teams in the raid docs if I find anything new. I usually put some notes in those and substitutes you can use for the teams. Starting off with the front-loaded damage team, putting the best DPS for this boss alongside the best buffers for her. This team with Cinderella, Crown, Rouge, and Summer Anise are core, especially if you have a really good Cinderella with high elemental. Axia with phase 2 or higher is usable also as an additional support for this team. Extra can be replaced with other units to fill as needed. Next up is Crown alternative with traditional electric team from the last solar raid with Ein instead of Cinderella, along with a different CDR unit. With this, we split up the major electric DPSs where we have Cinderella alternative with Rouge and Blanc. This does split off the damage distribution a bit more evenly, and you'll have to see which one works better for your account. Next up is the shotgun team, and there's 3 different shotgun teams you can do here. One is with the bunnies with Blanc and Noir, and the other is with Tia Naga. This one could also be good if your Naga has good elemental damage. And the last SG one is the traditional shotgun with Leona and either Noir or Bunny Alice. Next is the Tia Naga, but this one is fairly simple with either the combination of Scarlet Black Shadow with Alice or Red Hood with Ludmilla combo if you're not doing the shotgun team with Tia Naga. Following the Grave team, this one is fill in the gaps, but with min-maxers they would put Litter here to try for no healer run team, and with Litter's cover recovery you can alleviate a little bit of pressure off the DPS. Either use SBS and Alice combo, Ein, Red Hood, Ludmilla, or utilize a pseudo fire team. If you feel that you need a healer, Noise could be used as both a healer and electric, so you can use that, or you can use Helm or have a flex healer like Bunny Alice, Rapunzel, or Summer Mary, assuming that you do have another electric DPS on the side. Next is the Mari team, and this one is similar to Grave team, except the good thing about this is you don't have to worry about not having an electric unit to deal with the shield QTE. This offers a bit more flexibility in terms of team building and allows an off-burst DPS like Modernia or buffer like Maxwell. And finally, if you have none of the previous teams set or invested, it's worth considering looking back into the old traditional Dorothy teams and maybe look into Zwei, Pierce on Snow White, although I think the ones with the luxury building this one are very few. But hey, something to think about for some of you. But yeah, bugs aside, this boss seemed to be a nice refresher. There wasn't anything that seemed very difficult mechanics-wise and complicated in terms of team building required, unlike Mirror Container. There's a lot of things that can be done via playing better, and the team build variety you can do in this boss fight seemed rather simple enough. But yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on this boss? Is this boss giving you a hard time or not? In any case, I'll be free to answer your questions if you visit my Twitch at twitch.tv/KaiJLV, so if you want to chat more and hang out, just come stop by. By the way, did you know that 56% of you still hasn't subscribed yet? Make sure to click that subscribe button, click that bell notification, leave a comment, like, and subscribe.